Good afternoon and welcome to Brisbane Boys College. My name is Mason Black. I am the 2021 college captain and I am delighted to be a Master of Ceremonies today. Before we begin, please join me in welcoming Shantia Warridu from Clayfield College, who will give the acknowledgement of country prayer.
Thank you, Mason. God of all creation, we ask for your blessing on this country, on our students, our staff, our schools, and on us as we gather here today. We acknowledge the Turrbal people from the north side of the Brisbane River, the Jagera people from the south side of the Brisbane River, and we respect the spiritual relationship they have with this country. We pay respects to elders, past, present, and emerging, and recognise the strength, resilience, and capacity of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We ask you to bless our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters, and bless us. Help us to join our hands and hearts together. Help us to heal one another in the land, so that our lives may flow with harmony and that we may live with love and deep respect. Amen.
Thank you, Shantia. It is now my pleasure to introduce PMSA Chair to launch this inaugural lecture this afternoon and introduce our keynote speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Mason. The Australian Leadership Lecture is one of the PMSA's flagship annual events, and it's been several years in the making, thanks to COVID. I'm absolutely delighted that we're all able to now be here as one. I'd like to firstly welcome the Year 12 students from our 4 PMSA schools, Brisbane Boys College, Clayfield College, Somerville House, and joining us via online video link, Sunshine Coast Grammar School. I'd also like to welcome our guests who are both in the hall today with us and those watching online around Australia. Fellow members of the PMSA board, welcome. PMSA governance officers from our school councils and group committees. PMSA Group CEO Sharon Callister and group office staff. Our school principals and school staff. More than 1,000 Year 12 students from across Australia, including Fairholme College in Toowoomba, Moreton Bay College, Moreton Bay Boys College in Manly, and Methodist Ladies College in Melbourne. Parents, welcome. Past students of our 4 schools, welcome to you. Members of our school foundations and PNFs. And of course, our inspirational speaker, Noel Pearson. Thank you all for attending and watching online today. Exactly 30 years ago, I was in this place and thinking what my life journey as an Australian might look like. At the time, Australia was an aspirational yet somewhat insular nation, trying to figure out its place in the world. I guess at that time, I too was a little naive and let myself believe that Australia was a young country and we would come of age at some point in our future. In the 3 decades that have passed since I was in this place, I've spent more than 2 of them as an Australian living abroad, observing our country from the outside. It's been a fascinating view and one that provides a different perspective to that which I might have had should I have stayed in Australia. Living as a minority in foreign countries, I've never stopped thinking about what it means to be Australian. How that notion has changed over time and how it might change in the future. Most poignantly, over that time, I've come to recognise the opportunity we continue to miss, to own our collective past and positively and deliberately shape our future national identity in a global context. Let's all remember today, Australia is not a young country. Believing that it is denies the enormity and magnificence of our connected demographic history. Australia's known 60,000-year history is something to be cherished, something to be celebrated, something to be identified with by all Australians. Now in our second century, the PMSA is proud of the contribution our schools and many of our past students have made to Australian life. But we believe we need to do more. Today's inaugural Australian Leadership Lecture is an important step in the direction of us doing more. Each year we will invite a significant person to challenge our senior students to contemplate the possible. Today is part of the PMSA's exciting transformational journey. Developed from our strategic plan, this event is the first of many initiatives that will drive innovation and knowledge sharing throughout our organisation, provide enrichment opportunities for students and educators alike, and help us remain a leading voice in education. I challenge you to take the opportunity to listen to and debate what is said today and to contemplate the future of our nation. How can you shape it? It is my absolute pleasure to introduce our inaugural keynote speaker, Mr. Noel Pearson. Noel comes from the Gugu Yimida community of Hopevale on southeastern Cape York Peninsula. He is an Indigenous Australian, land rights activist, and a history and law graduate of the University of Sydney. Mr. Pearson is the founder and director of strategy of the Cape York Partnership and founder and co-chair of Good to Great Schools Australia. Noel also co-founded the Cape York Land Council and helped establish the Punipina Health Council, Balkanu Cape York Development Corporation and Indigenous Enterprise Partnerships. Mr. Pearson has served as a member of the expert panel on constitutional recognition of Indigenous Australians and the Referendum Council. There are very few more significant Australian thought leaders than Mr. Pearson. He has made a lifetime contribution to the betterment of Australia in general and in particular his own people. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Noel Pearson. Thank you.
Thank you. I acknowledge the First Nations of this city and bring greetings from Cape York Peninsula. For the honour of being here with senior students of Clayfield College, Somerville House, Sunshine Coast Grammar School and Brisbane Boys College, I thank your schools and the Presbyterian and Methodist Schools Association. I want particularly to pay tribute to Clayfield College in recognition of the love you gave and received from your alumnus, Tanya Major. We started our Cape York boarding school partnerships with Tanya when, as an articled clerk at the Melbourne law firm of Arnold Block Liebler, I heard from a teacher at Kowanyama of a young girl whose mother was selling cakes to raise money for her schooling at a prestigious Brisbane school. My Jewish mentors impressed me with the priority they accorded mentorship and education, and my duty to create educational opportunities for our younger generations in Cape York became clear. Tanya graduated from Clayfield and became Kowanyama's first university graduate and later Young Australian of the Year. Her leadership continues to be a credit to herself, her mother and family, and to Clayfield College, her first home away from home. These 25 years since we have seen hundreds of our young scholars succeed in Queensland's best private boarding schools and we continue to grow our Year 12 completions and university graduates. My Jewish mentors, Clayfield and Tanya, taught me the importance of spreading opportunity. There is hardly a privileged school that does not provide scholarships for the disadvantaged and Indigenous students in Queensland and across the country. If your school does not, then it needs to start. There is no principle of philosophy that justifies the refusal to open the doors of opportunity to those who stand in need. Let me explain my thoughts about school education and the great privileges each of you have, which your parents and family members enjoyed and which I myself had when I left the Hopevale Lutheran mission of my childhood to attend boarding school at St. Peter's Lutheran College 43 years ago as a Year 8 student. They were the best years of my life. My old school and yours are immensely great and extraordinary in terms of what our teachers do and what we as students experience and achieve. But ours are not the really great schools of Queensland. This is because our schools are what I call reproduction schools. They faithfully reproduce the advantages of the students and the families from which they are drawn. Life trajectories for those of us who have the privilege of attending St. Peter's or Somerville House are not much altered by the schooling we receive there. Indeed, if there is a change, it is most often to greater advantage than one already has. This is the nature of reproduction schools. They reproduce privilege and advantage, and well may they do so. Of course, there is a downside to reproduction schools. Students and families from disadvantaged communities that cannot enter schools such as ours are served by schools, chiefly public schools, that reproduce the disadvantages of their students. Life trajectories are seldom changed. The odd student defies the reproductive processes of these schools, but the general rule is that disadvantaged schools reproduce disadvantaged graduates. I will be blunt. Any school with students from advantaged backgrounds can do well with their students. That Queensland's best private schools and most selective public schools, like Brisbane State High, routinely achieve outstanding results is nothing to crow about. Real greatness lies with the transformational schools. Those schools that take students wherever their socio-economic background and whatever their personal learning attributes and circumstances, and transform their life prospects. The transformational schools defy the forces of reproduction. They have the hardest challenges with the most struggling students from the most benighted families. And they offer an alternative future to the perpetuation of their backstories. We have a rare privilege For every school like ours that routinely reproduce advantage, there are 100 schools that reproduce disadvantage. This is an injustice, not of merit or choice or outcome, but an injustice of opportunity. Once we realise the opportunity we have, the call on our obligation to spread educational opportunity to all Queenslanders becomes a moral imperative in our lives. From sharing our advantages to supplying poor schools with great teachers, to getting out of our comfort zones as schools and partnering with disadvantaged communities and families to extend a hand up rather than a hand out through the power of good school education. I am briefed with talking about the subject of Australian leadership. Upon reflection, I have some misgiving speaking to leadership, as I am not and have never been elected to represent anyone. Whilst I may have had my nose pressed to the glass of the big houses of elected leadership, these are not houses easily entered by people like me. The truth is, I am an activist in the public life of our country. I deal in the currency of ideas rather than mandate from electors. I am not sure I can truly make a claim to leadership because I have never held structural or executive power. No law or public institution mandates my authority. I can only speak. Ultimately, like so many others who have no structural power, I speak for myself. And my irrelevance to public debate is always a likely question. Without the currency of ideas, people like me would have no purchase in public life. So what I have to say about our country has to be taken with these qualifications. Because what I have to say are things that normally fall within the province of elected leaders. Socrates told those who advised him to recant and save himself from death that it is impossible for me to keep quiet. I know this allusion is outrageous, so forgive me, but it is for me the source of leadership. The imperative to speak no matter one's station in life, and needing no other legitimacy other than one's moral responsibilities as a human. Having made these admissions, I want to speak to a time when most of you will be parents with young children. Many of them on their way to attending your schools as students of old scholars. I pray that in 2041, your children will live in a nation that is clear about who they are, where they have come from, and who the Australian people are. I recently made the observation to the National Museum of Australia that because Australia failed to recognise the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander First Nations of our country, not in 1770, when Lieutenant James Cook navigated the eastern seaboard, not in 1788 with the landing of the First Fleet in Sydney Cove, not in the subsequent founding of the colonies, and not in their federation under the Commonwealth of Australia in 1901. Australia remains deeply uncertain about its origin and its identity. My point was that Australia is an absurdity without its Indigenous peoples. This uncertainty and confusion is growing as more and more Australians join with Indigenous peoples each Australia Day. The dissonance grows yearly, and our political leaders don't know what to do. They think they can chart a course for the 21st century with a 19th century mindset. What is Australia? And who are the Australian people? What answer will you be able to furnish to your children in 20 years' time? What will need to happen if we are to have a shared answer to this question that respects our diversity and becomes the wellspring of the unity of our Commonwealth? The recognition of Indigenous Australians in the Australian Constitution is a project of long standing. It is older than the cause of same-sex marriage, which succeeded with the passage by the Commonwealth Parliament of amendments to the Marriage Act in 2017. It is older than the cause of women's equality, which has made gains, but as Grace Tarmay and Brittany Higgins have told us so clearly, is a cause of justice that we still need to confront. The current process of public discussion, parliamentary investigations and public consultations began with Prime Minister John Howard's initiative on the eve of the 2007 federal election campaign to commit to constitutional recognition of Indigenous Australians. It is now 13 years later. It is 10 years since the first official process, Prime Minister Julia Gillard's appointment of an expert panel, reported on options for recognition in 2011. But as anyone familiar with the history of Indigenous rights will know, this campaign for Indigenous justice and inclusion is now into its third century. 1770, 1788, 1901. If not then why not now? 2007 to 2021. If not now, then when? The parlous present, this burning platform from which we consider our situation, is plain. We live in an extraordinary nation with such stupendous bounty and among the highest standards of living in the world. And yet the anomaly of the status of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders stares us in the face. Its most striking manifestation is the rates of imprisonment of Indigenous peoples. 3% of the country's population represent 30% of the prison population. The rates in Western Australia and the Northern Territory are even more egregious. Rates of children in out-of-home care are obscene, as are the rates of youth in detention. Young people, just like you, coming from a minuscule proportion of the population, fill the detention centres of the country and will likely go on to adult incarceration. The Uluru Statement from the Heart made these startling truths the starting point for its case for recognition. It said, proportionally, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are aliened from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them, and our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. Where could we be in 2041? I told the National Museum this is what lies on the horizon for us as Australians. With constitutional recognition, soon will come the day when we acknowledge three stories: the ancient Indigenous heritage, which is Australia's foundation, the British institutions built upon it, and the adorning gift of multicultural migration. This would be an Australia where we are all confident about who we are, where we have come from, and what binds us together in mutual recognition, respect, and unity. But we will need some ideas to get there. Let me make 5 proposals for what I think we will need to do in order to secure the kind of Australia that resolves the contradictions and absurdities that are the consequence of the failure of recognition. The first idea is that we must learn to think of layers of identity rather than identity fundamentalism. We are all members of communities of identity that are common to our families, but we also harbour identities that we don't share with our families. Identity is not just religion and ethnicity, but extends to other passions and interests we share with other citizens, many unknown to us. I am not only Aboriginal, I am particularly a Murray from Queensland, and even more so Pama from Cape York Peninsula, and even more so Gulguyimidr from southeastern Cape York. Whilst at the level of my clan estate, I am Bakarmoku from the Genie River, the seat of my great-grandfathers. I am a North Queenslander, and a Queenslander for other purposes, and I am an Australian when I am moved to be. But my identity is also based in the Lutheran mission of my family. And I share an identity with Lutherans all over the country. And indeed, I feel an affiliation with the Lutherans of Bavaria in Germany, who had sent the missionaries to Cape Bedford in 1886. I am a member of a strange recreational community that believes that there is a game played in heaven. And it is neither rugby league nor Australian rules. The point is that we have multiple identities that create bonds with people known to us and bridges to those unknown to us. All of these layers of identity are of different degree and meaning, and they are highly contextual. And the combinations of the warp and weave that make each of our own contributions to the national fabric of our country are unique to each of us. The more bonds and bridges we have, the stronger the unity of our national fabric. It is when we fall for ideas of identity fundamentalism that we make a mistake. When we make religion, ethnicity, or sexual orientation our fundamental identity, and we lose sight of the layers of other identities that define us, identity turns from a blessing and celebration and becomes the problem of identity politics. We must learn to respect individuals in all of their diversity, including all of the layers of identity that bind each of us to each other. To simply demonize identity politics is not the right response. The rejection of identity ends up sounding like a call for the return to assimilation and the repression of diversity. And the legitimate claims to recognition and justice are denied on that basis. The second idea is that we see that ours is a triune commonwealth, comprising its Indigenous foundations, British institutional heritage, and the gifts of multicultural migration. This is plainly who we are and where we have come from. This is the meaning of our inheritance as Australians. Every nation on the planet has its own story. The triune commonwealth is ours. The third idea is we must rethink our economy. I call it Adam Smith's economy, not in the same sense that those who have advocated the neoliberal turn over the past 40 years have interpreted Smith, but in the proper way that the Canadian philosopher John Ralston Saul outlined 3 decades ago. Adam Smith is famous for 2 books. The first, The Wealth of Nations, is the book that the neoliberals appropriated as their Bible. The invisible hand of the market was the best way to allocate resources of the economy. The second, The Theory of Moral Sentiment, was disregarded. And this was Ralston Saul's complaint. I share his complaint. Whereas I agree that the self-regard that underpins liberal economics is a great engine, we must balance our commitment to markets with a proper social motivation, our regard for others. This is where our obligation to ensure that we resist monopolies and we ensure everyone has opportunity stems from. We need to develop an inclusive economy that gives a hand up to the disadvantaged, strengthens the working middle, and unleashes the entrepreneurs, and which combines the liberal engine of self-regard with the social regard of moral sentiment. The fourth idea is Edmund Burke's idea of society. No better definition of the meaning of society has ever been articulated by a political leader than that of the 19th century British Prime Minister. Society is a convocation of our ancestors, us the living, and our future unborn. We inherit good things from our ancestors, and we want to hand them on to our future generations. We owe our ancestors for the gifts they've bequeathed us, and we owe our unborn an obligation to pass things on to them in good stead. We are trustees for our future children on behalf of our predecessors. Society is not only us the living, is Burke's enduring conception. The fifth idea is from another conservative English philosopher, Roger Scruton, who wrote in a 2012 book, Green Philosophy, about oikophilia, the love of home. Scruton's profound insight was that conservatives should be for conservation because we have the Burkean view of society and we love our homes and want to bequeath to our descendants the blessings of nature for their future enjoyment. The love of our home, Australia, is the reason we want to conserve it for our descendants. The animation for responses to climate change and the calamitous loss of biodiversity due to the action of humans is oikophilia, the common love we all must have for home. These are 5 ideas that are crucial if we're to create a better Australia within 20 years of your taking leave of your high school education. What we need is leadership. Will it be forthcoming from our elected leaders? Each of the political parties are not as bad as each considers the other, and neither of them are anywhere as good as they think they are. Since the 2007 election and the subsequent regicide of Prime Minister Kevin Rudd at the hands of his own party, our national political leadership has been at a low ebb. Will the Prime Minister Scott Morrison or his erstwhile successor, opposition leader Anthony Albanese, be able to provide the leadership we need? I cannot say. I can only say we need leadership. The kind of leadership President Abraham Lincoln showed when he remade America out of the blood-soaked fields of the Civil War with his words at Gettysburg. An astounding example of how leadership can remake a nation. The kind of leadership shown by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt when he remade the American economy following the Great Depression as an economy for all and not just the few. The kind of leadership shown by Lyndon Baines Johnson when he plotted the success of the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and the Voting Rights Act in 1965 through the thickets of a hostile Congress. The kind of leadership shown by Prime Minister Paul Keating when he defended the Mabo decision from annihilation and secured the passage of the Native Title Act through the Parliament in 1993. And the kind of leadership shown by Prime Minister John Howard when he started the campaign for constitutional recognition of Indigenous Australians in 2007. Let me digress with this personal declaration of Australia and the Australian people. We might consider thinking about these ideas. Whereas 3 stories make Australia, the ancient Indigenous heritage, which is its foundation, the British institutions built upon it, and the adorning gift of multicultural migration. And whereas Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the First Nations of the Australian continent and its islands, possessed under ancient laws and customs, according to the reckoning of culture from the creation, according to the common law from time immemorial, and according to science for more than 65 millennia. This is a spiritual notion, the ancestral tie between the land, or Mother Nature, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom, remain attached thereto, and must one day return thither to be united with their ancestors. We recognise and honour the First Nations who discovered Australia as their sovereign possession, the oldest continuing civilisation in the world. And whereas those who sailed the first fleet, landing at Sydney Cove, carried upon their shoulders the common law of England, when the sovereignty of the British Crown was proclaimed, the rule of law, parliamentary government, and the Australian English language have their provenance in Britain. From eyes on board ship, this was a settlement. And from eyes on shore, an invasion. We recognise the eve of the 25th and the dawn of the 26th January 1788 as a profound time for all of us when ancient Australia became the new Australia. We recognise and honour the Britons and Irish, convict and free, who founded our institutional heritage, making our Commonwealth from 1901 a great democracy of the globe. And whereas peoples the earth over brought their multitude of cultural gifts to Australia, that we celebrate diversity in unity makes us a beacon under the world. We recognise and honour our new Australians. When we renounced the White Australia policy, we made a better Commonwealth. We show that people with different roots can live together, that we can learn to read the image bank of others, that we can look across the frontiers of our differences without prejudice or illusion. Because interesting things happen at the interface between cultures. Now, therefore, with earnest and open hearts and strong desire to fill the lacuna, after more than 2 centuries, we make this declaration of Australia and the Australian people. To see our reflections in each other and recognise one and all. Our history is replete with shame and pride, failure and achievement, fear and love, cruelty and kindness, conflict and comity, mistake and brilliance, folly and glory. We will not shy from its truth, our storylines entwine further each generation, we will ever strive to leave our country better for our children. We will honour the Uluru Statement from the heart and make good upon it. Whilst English is the shared language of our Commonwealth, mother tongues name the country and sing its songlines, and we do not want for them to pass from this land. They are part of the cultural and natural wonder of our country, that is the campfire of our national soul, and the pledge of care and custody we owe to our ancestral dead and unborn descendants. After the battles of our frontier wars fell silent, diggers from the First Nations joined their settler and new Australian comrades in the crucibles of Gallipoli and Kokoda, and there distilled the essence of our values. That our mateship is and will always be our enduring bond. That freedom and the fair go are our abiding ethic. That our virtues of equality and irreverence give us courage to have a go. That we know we can and always will count on each other. 3 stories make us one, Australians. What can we do as Australian citizens? Let me paraphrase BBC College Captain Mason Black in his tectonic speech about respect for the equality of women. Because the personal responsibility all of us share to make a better Commonwealth is where our work for the next 20 years must start. Mason told this school, every person in this room must not just be an advocate for the recognition of Indigenous Australians, but in our every action, indeed, we have to be proactive in stopping the denial. This starts with putting an end to slurs and derogatory comments about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It means standing up to any power, no matter who they are, if we see it happening. And we have to keep our mates accountable, no matter where it may be. Each and every one of us have an obligation to each other to not follow the ways of the past and to take our future on a new path, a path that uplifts and values our First Nations for who they are, appreciates their intelligence, strength and inner beauty, and most importantly, empowers them to live a life where they can take their rightful place in the country without judgment, and they feel supported to be themselves, not changed to be anyone different. I salute Mason Black for his outrageous and exemplary courage. We have learned from his leadership. He's shown us what we can and must do if we want to build a better Commonwealth that respects women as equals, and shone a light for me on the personal responsibility we all have to remake the nation. You all will be of voting age when the question of constitutional recognition of Indigenous Australians will be put to the Australian people. The referendum will require a majority of voters and a majority of the states to say yes. This will require your vote. But more than your vote, it will require your participation in the campaign for recognition. It will require you to take the personal responsibility that Mason talked about. It will require you to mobilise so that the 97% of Australians recognise the 3% of its First Nations. Campaign research produced by the From the Heart campaign shows that as of June last year, only 17% would vote no in a referendum on a voice. 56% would vote yes, with the remainder undecided. The research also found that undecided voters were more likely to support a voice once they are aware of it and understood it. If there's anything I want to impress upon you, is that the question of recognition is not only about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, it is about all Australians and the very idea of Australia. I told the National Museum, recognition is a mirror. When the descendants of the British colonists, the Italians, the Greeks, the Vietnamese, the Congolese, the Sudanese and the Indians, the Lebanese and the Chinese are recognised by the Indigenous, there is mutual recognition and we see ourselves in each other's eyes. There can be no unilateral recognition of a part without mutual recognition of the whole. We are building a mirror to recognise each other as Australians. Thank you.
Mr. Pearson, thank you for your thought-provoking speech. I would now like to invite fellow Year 12 students to the floor to ask Mr. Pearson some questions. First, let's cross to our Sunshine Coast Grammar School student representatives, college captains Aidan and Eloise.
Pearson, I'm sure there are a number of young people here today who want to respond to the challenge that you have set for us.
Please tell us what our first steps can be.
Okay. Well, we have a campaign called From the Heart. Our pollsters are the Liberal and National Party pollsters, Crosby Textor. So we are advised in our campaign by the best operators in politics. We believe that a positive campaign that demonstrates the benefits of recognition and constitutional recognition of an Indigenous voice to the Parliament, once the details of that proposal are explained to the Australian people, that we will close the gap on the undecided. My view is that the challenge lies not with the Australian people, but with the Parliament. We have to convince both sides of Parliament to pass the necessary legislation so that the question can be put at a referendum. It is not good enough for politicians to say, well, the people won't vote for it, because all of our numbers are telling us that the people will vote. But the way our constitution operates is that we require the Parliament to first pass a law allowing the vote to happen. So I enjoin all of you, you're 17 going on 18. You will get the right to vote when you're 18. And this referendum will happen in the next 1, 2, 3 years. It has to happen. And we need the support of young Australians to take this issue to a resolution.
Mr. Pearson.
I would like to welcome my fellow Brisbane Boys College Vice Captain, Matt Bennett, to the floor.
Mr. Pearson, when you were a young adult, who inspired you to be the man we see here today, and how did they do that?
So, my father said, ever since I was a young boy, he was not an educated man. He only went to year 3 at the mission. But he always told me Francis Bacon's great saying, reading makes a full man. And we would be slopping the pigs or mowing the lawn or rounding up the cows, and he'd be telling us, reading makes a full man. So that ultimately was what got me thinking and reading. But my principal at the mission school, Mr. Shivey, he did 3 things. 1, he gave me a biography of the great Aboriginal leader, Charlie Perkins, called A Bastard Like Me. And I was 10 years old, and it was so shocking to read a title of a book in those words. And I read every word of it. I also read a biography of the late Governor-General of South Australia. And these moments were really inspired me in the pursuit of leadership and the cause of our people. My principal at Hopevale was the first person to ever say to me, he said it at a community event, this boy will go to university. My parents would never have known what a university was. And Mr. Shivey planted that idea in my head when I was in year 4. And so my inspirations for study and leadership came from my school at Hopevale and from my father. And over the years, I've thought that, because my father's counsel to me was that the purpose of life was to serve God and to serve your fellow man. He said nothing about serving yourself. And I used to complain, I have complained many times, that I was never told to look after myself. My father's counsel that the purpose of life is to serve God and to serve your fellow man has been both a burden and a beacon for my life path.
I would like to welcome Clayfield College Captain Claudia Sutherland to the floor.
Mr. Pearson, when you were our age, what hopes did you have for Australia, and have any of these aspirations been realised?
No, not yet. I want young Indigenous people of the future to be like you, to first pursue the things you want to do, to fulfill all of your talent and potential in the world. I would hate for another generation of Indigenous students to feel obligated to continue to struggle. I've dedicated all of my adult life to the cause of our people. And I don't want that to be an obligation that is perpetual for our people. I want them to pursue things in music and the arts and literature and careers and like anybody else in the world. I don't want them tied to a forlorn cause. It's a necessary cause. We have got to secure freedom and recognition and empowerment. But that cause is now ticked over for me, as it has for many of my predecessors. I'm just hoping that we will come to a point in our history where we have settled the question of recognition. We have ensured that Indigenous people are empowered in the nation and they've taken a rightful place within it, and for them to pursue all of their talents and creativity and potential as Australians, whatever they may be. And that is the dream, but its arrival is long in the coming.
I would like to welcome Somerville House student representative Alyciana Armstrong.
Mr. Pearson, can you comment on the rate of change you've seen recently? Has this been flatlining? And what can we as students do to increase this rate?
Oh, we have made progress. Absolutely. When we got rid of terra nullius with the High Court's decision in Mabo, we made progress. We settled the question of land rights peacefully under the common law of the country. Think about that. What do nations most fight about across the planet? They fight about land. They fight about grievances related to history and land. And yet we in Australia have had the privilege of a solution fashioned by our highest court. The High Court's decision in the Mabo case and in the Wick case that I worked on in my early career, those decisions have been fundamental in giving us the opportunity to settle long-standing grievance through the operation of law, through peaceful means. So Mabo was absolutely fundamental, and we got rid of the idea that the country was not owned. Indeed, it was the law of England that gave us that opportunity. Most Australians don't understand Mabo. Mabo is the law of England that accorded to our people the rights that English law accord to other people who are in occupation and possession of land. We've made progress. There are some parameters that are actually unjust to the rest of the country. We are 10% of the Australian Rugby League and 10% of the Australian Football League. We'll have to close the gap the other way. But too many of the important parameters concerning health, education, and wealth, those are the three, health, education, and wealth, are the areas where the gaps are stupendously large. And we need to redouble our efforts to close the gap on those parameters. But I don't see us making headway with social and economic parameters unless we get the first thing right, which is to recognise that that the country is not just 250 years old. Everything that's happened since 1788 isn't the whole story. And once we come to terms with that idea, I think we will create the space for Indigenous people. Galarrwuy Yunganapingu, an elder from Arnhem Land, one of our great leaders, best put it when he said, "You have to allow us to be a modern version of ourselves. Give us the space to be a modern version of ourselves." So that's what we seek. I think it's crucial for empowerment. I think it's crucial for us to build on the gains that we've made, because there have been gains. In Cape York Peninsula, we will finish our fight for land rights in the next few years. It's an amazing thing. We will have settled justice for land in the next couple of years. So, whilst the constitutional recognition remains our most difficult challenge, simply because to change the Constitution is a bloody hard thing to do. It's in the nature of the change mechanism. We've got to round a lot of cats up. We have to round a lot of cats up to get this thing done. But I think we can do it. And we're in the midst of our best opportunity in 2 centuries.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. And thank you, Aidan, Eloise, Matthew, Claudia, and Aliciana for your insightful questions. To finish, I would like to now introduce Somerville House School Captain Dianetra Epper to provide the vote of thanks.
Thanks, Mason. It's my great pleasure to thank our speakers today. First and foremost, Mr. Pearson, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today and share your wisdom, inspiration, and candour. It was important for all the students to hear your 2041 vision. I know we will reflect and hopefully act on your words as we grow and become leaders ourselves. Please accept this gift as a token of our gratitude. Mason, thanks for being our Master of Ceremonies today. Brisbane Boys College, thank you for generously opening College Hall for today's lecture. And to the PMSA, thank you for organising this wonderful initiative. On behalf of Somerville House, Clayfield College, Sunshine Coast Grammar School and Brisbane Boys College, thank you to all for attending and tuning in. We hope Mr. Pearson's address encourages you to reflect on Australia's identity and consider how we can better honour and celebrate all Indigenous peoples and our culturally diverse and egalitarian society. The Brisbane Boys College, Clayfield College, Somerville House and Sunshine Coast Grammar classes of 2022 look forward to welcoming you all to next year's annual Australian Leadership Lecture. Enjoy your evening and thank you.